the last thing that I want to kind of pose with you. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical, and let's see how you do.
I'll do my best. I'll try.
All right. So let's say that I myself was like, you know what? I want to retire in Canada because I really want to take advantage of all those, healthcare benefits. I don't want to have to worry about, what's going to happen with me and all these medical bills here in the States. So I love snow skiing, and I want to relocate to Canada, preferably a province that doesn't have the extra taxes, like you mentioned, that 15% to steer me away or whatever it might be. What would you recommend? And let's say I'm going to hire you, Shiraz.
Well, I can help you on the financial side, but I'd say that number one, again, so let's go back to the cross borders, the intersection of the three laws. So your
Yeah.
immigration piece. So on what status are you coming to Canada? So is your spouse a Canadian? Are they sponsoring you? Are you getting employment in Canada? But if you're retiring, what is your status? How are you getting there? So that's question number one that I would ask somebody to make sure that they understand what's their legal entitlement to be in Canada. Now, again, as an American, you can visit Canada. Visa-less travel between Canada and the United States is totally doable. However, you need to be make sure that if you're going to be permanent resident of Canada, that you're applying to do that appropriately. So
Okay.
that's point number one.
Piece is going to be part one. Talking with the immigration officer and saying, look, I want to live here now. What do I need to do?
Correct. So there'll be a system in place. I believe it's a point system. As somebody who was born in Canada, I can't speak to too much on that one just because I've never actually went through it myself.
Okay.
But I do know that there's a scoring system and a point system. So there'll be an application process, and then once it's done, assuming that you get granted that, okay, yes, you'll be allowed to come to Canada. After a period of time in Canada, you do become a permanent resident, and as a permanent resident, you then are typically entitled to the health benefits that come with being in Canada. So depending on what province that you're in, let's say that you're not in Ontario and you decide to go to Manitoba or in Alberta, which a lot of Americans tend to go to as well. It's pretty similar. I like to refer to Alberta as the Texas of Canada. Very similar in a lot of different ways. So let's just say that you're going there, then you'd be able to get your Alberta health card, and then you'll be able to access healthcare in Canada as well. But then now there's a tax system as well, depending on where are your assets,
Right.
how are you living here? There's a lot of variables that kind of go with it. And then, of course, are you cool with being in the cold weather? So that's a whole other can of worms, but that's a real thing for people. I don't think people realize. So I'm, for the record, born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's the third coldest city on the planet. And people don't realize it's I've seen minus 60, minus 65 degrees Celsius, which is really cold. I don't even know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's cold. So you have to be okay with snow, and you have to be okay with cold. And Canadians just learn to deal with it. So I know that you guys had that big freeze over, the once in 100 years event that happened a few months back, and that was bad. But that's like all the time here. But the difference is our homes and everything are prepared for it. So we have the insulation, all that kind of stuff. So you're used to it up here.
Yeah, I think the other difference too is that our power went out. So imagine being in that weather, and then you're like, oh,
yes.
the
Yeah, that's not good.
I'm sure it happens. I mean, I'm sure there's blizzard-like conditions to where maybe your power does go out, and then you have to have emergency stuff together.
It does happen, not that often, surprisingly enough, but it does happen from time to time. So it's pretty good for the most part. That's usually one of our strong points here. But again, that's going to be very relative to your local region. So going back to your original question, and again, I apologize for digressing, but that's where it's important. So what status are you in? What's your current tax circumstance? What's your financial circumstance looking like? So where are you going? And what are you bringing with you, and how are you going to be there? Those are kind of the main things that you want to look at.
Right. And so if I'm retiring, I know that, let's say that I've got an IRA or a Roth, set up that have all of my retirement funds. Would that come with me, correct? And I would transition it into the Canadian similarity, or the Canadian equivalent to those types of things?
So lots of people try to do that. That's actually not really the ideal way. So going back to my analogy on the cement poles in the ground. So your Roths and your IRAs and everything in the United States, those, you're entitled to keep them. So just because you leave the country, that doesn't mean you have to get rid of it. and you
Okay.
don't actually have to bring into a Canadian equivalent. It's actually a really messy transaction to try to do that. So we typically discourage people from doing it unless there's a real need to do that, or if frankly, if it's a really small amount. But let's just say you're hypothetical, you're retiring. Let's just assume you have a pretty significant amount, and that's going to be how you fund your retirement. Well, then in that case, I typically wouldn't advise doing it. You're actually better suited, and there's some enhanced planning opportunities around it being kept as as an IRA or even a Roth.
Mm.
So
So
for
here,
that, yeah, you can maintain the RMDs as you get over 72. You can take them out. They can just, rather than wiring it to an American account, wire it to a Canadian bank account if you need to.
okay.
You just need to be with a financial institution that is allowed to keep you. And that is really the Achilles heel for most people, is that when you have an American moving to Canada,
Mm-hmm.
your financial assets, some of them will have to come with you. So the non-retirement accounts you have to bring to Canada. There's
Mm-hmm.
no kind of, that's a line in the sand. You got to do it. Your non-retirement accounts can stay, but they
Okay.
just need to be managed with a financial institution and a financial advisor that's allowed to keep you when you're no longer a US resident. And
Uh,
that's the unique part.
that's where you and your company come in.
Absolutely. So this is where we do so the self-serving plug, but
Yeah.
absolutely, that is what it is. It is a pretty unique situation where, again, because I do carry that dual license, that is really our wheelhouse. So when an American is moving abroad, that's a really common occurrence because of how prevalent 401k plans are, 403b plans are. So because of that, people have a lot of deferred comp that's left over. So what typically ends up happening is a couple scenarios, but one is best case scenario, your stuff gets frozen. So it is what it is. The day that you moved over the border, that's how it is. The U.S. plan administrator is no longer allowed to really take any direction from you. You can't make any changes other than when you retire, they might be able to send you a check, right?
Right.
And worst case scenario, especially this is common with the individual or self-directed accounts like an IRA. You may get the Dear John letter that says that you have 60 or 90 days to move your account somewhere else, or else we're going to mail you a check and you can pay the taxes. And that's really what we try to help people avoid, is to have that scenario where you may be scrambling and you don't know what to do. And
Yeah.
that's going back to my original comment. Planning is such an important thing because a
Yeah.
lot of these situations are preventable. Like, you don't have to go through that if you just do a little bit of homework and, again, speak to counsel wherever you need to, whether it be immigration, tax, or financial, or even real estate. Make
Yeah.
sure you have your professionals on the road to help you with that transition. They are
Mhm.
two separate countries that share a really big land border, but couldn't be more different. So
Right.
you want to make sure that you have counsel helping you along that transition. Moving in itself is a pain. So imagine moving countries on top of that, right? So
Mhm.
it only gets worse. So I would encourage everybody to seek out counsel and to help make that transition easy.